Welcome to Authors Revealed. I'm Becky Anderson. I am thrilled. We have Australian author Robert Hoge here with his young readers edition of Ugly, his memoir of growing up with facial deformities, but finding the true person in him and finding the beauty that all of us can find in each other. Well, Robert, it's so great to have you here at Anderson's and in Naperville.
Thanks so much, Becky.
I have been so looking for it. When I saw this book, it was coming out, and when I heard you were coming, I was so excited, so excited. So how does it feel? Because I know the book is just out in the world here in the States.
It
just
is
yesterday.
Just yesterday.
Yeah. So how does it feel having it out here? And now you're out on tour and talking to kids and adults about this book, because this is the young readers edition, basically, of what you published in Australia.
Yeah. So it's great. You know, it's always good having a book out in the world. It's very, it's a lovely feeling, and it's good to actually be able to be out there to talk to people, but especially kids, and get their reaction to the story that's in the book.
Yeah. Now, did this young readers edition, is this out in Australia, New Zealand, or
it
anywhere
is,
else too?
yes.
So I wanted to ask you about the cover, because I love the cover on the adult version that was published by Hachette in Australia. And I love that picture of you in the water. That is so good. But how do you feel about the cover on this book?
Oh, I love it. I really love it. And I've been very lucky. I mean, I've had some other overseas editions, but I've had 3 English language versions of Ugly come out. An adult edition in Australia, which had a really lovely and warm and inviting cover on it. And I had a young readers edition come out in Australia, which also had a really lovely kind of caricature of me on there, which is really nice.
Right.
And then this one, and I really love this one. Penguin's put a lot of work into it, and got something that I think hopefully appeals to boys and girls, and that neither gender would be shy to pick up. And hopefully adults wouldn't feel amiss having it in their hand either.
Yeah.
So I've just been incredibly lucky.
So.
And really blessed with the covers I've had.
Do you have any choice or say in what goes on the covers of your books?
I think because it's a memoir, the publishers generally want to make sure that you're comfortable with it. But I'm not an expert. I'm really happy to take guidance. I know this cover, for the viewers who haven't seen it, this cover has some foil on it. So the book's called Ugly, and it's a hand holding a mirror, and the mirror's got some foil on it. But when Penguin sent it to me, they sent me the PDF, and I opened it up when I woke up first thing in the morning, and there was a bunch of paragraphs of instructions and text there. And then, of course, I didn't read them. I just opened the PDF, and it was just this grey where the foil would be, and I'm like, oh, that doesn't look very nice. Then I went back and read the instructions, read the text, and it's like, oh, of course. So no, it's a tremendous cover, and I really love it.
So how are kids reacting? So in Australia or New Zealand, kids who have read it that you've talked to or in groups. So how are they reacting to your story and your memoir now that you're talking to younger audiences?
They're really engaging with it. I'm pretty frank about some of the stuff I went through as a baby and as a kid, and the physical deformities I had and the disability I have, and some of the teasing and bullying I experienced, and how that impacted on my life and what it might mean for them. And I think they really respond to the frankness of it, because it's not, despite it being called Ugly, I think it's a pretty positive book, and it takes a pretty positive outlook on life. And there's plenty of stuff in there that I think an average Aussie kid, and hopefully an average American kid, could relate to. It's entirely outside my experience of disability and difference. But I'm just hearing some really good stories of kids talking about how they feel different sometimes and what that means to them. And it's been really good.
Yeah. So how is it like adapting, the adult version to a young reader's edition? So was that an interesting process for you to try and adapt it for a younger reader?
It really was. After the adult edition came out in Australia, probably by happenstance really, I just found myself talking to more and more school groups. And eventually my publisher said, well, hey, why don't we write one for young readers? And I said, well, I don't know how I'll go writing for younger readers. Let me knock off a couple of chapters and see how it fits. And they liked it and I liked it. And so we went from there. Yeah. And, it's, in some ways it's easier, but it's also more challenging because you've got to strip out some of the detail, but you have to make sure that every word delivers a lot of value and it's really engaging their imagination and their interest, because kids are a tough audience.
Yes, I know, but I think you totally have captured what you had in the adult version in this. So I think it's really great. So how do you feel about everybody saying that this is great for anybody who's read Wonder and R.J. Palacio's book, and knowing that people are calling this the true Wonder, the true story of Wonder. So how do you feel about those comparisons and people using this as companions?
Look, it's I was going to say it's wonderful, but that's a poor pun. Look, it's a great book. I love Wonder. It's a really important book to have out there, and it's amazing that it has done so well and is still doing so well. And look, I think from a professional view, it's really good that there's a book out there that helps people make sense of my book, because that frame of reference helps, because people go, okay, well, this is like Wonder, but it's a kind of true life version of Wonder, or similar to Wonder. So I really welcome that comparison, because it kind of helps people understand it. And then, even some of the teacher librarians I've spoken to already, they say, well, we're really looking forward to having this book because we have so many kids who have read Wonder and say, oh, have you got any more books like this?
Right. Yeah. So, the way I look at your story and your memoir is it's something that adults and kids, we should all read stories like this and hear about these kind of experiences. But tell us about your mom, Mary, and tell us about, so people know the setting for this story and your birth in 1972. Yeah. And just tell us a little bit about that and how you started.
Yeah. Well, I was born to a working class family in 1972. I had 4 older siblings who, as I explained to kids when I talked to them, were perfectly healthy. I'm not going to call them normal, but they're perfectly healthy.
Well, no siblings ever normal.
No. But, I was the 5th kid to come along, and my parents had every right to expect another perfectly healthy kid. And, of course, in 1972, there were no prenatal scans. I was born with a massive tumour in the middle of my face, which ran from my forehead all the way down to the tip of where my nose should have been. It had formed really early during my development, made a mess of my face, pushed my eyes to the side of my head, and I also had 2 deformed legs. And I think my mum must have known pretty early during labour that something was wrong, because her first question to the doctor wasn't, is it a boy or a girl? Her first question was, is my baby okay? And the doctor said no, and explained what was wrong with me. And I got taken off to intensive care before my mother even saw me. And she refused to see me for a week. And then eventually one of the doctors there convinced her to come and see me. And then she came and looked down in my cot and saw this baby with this massive tumour in the middle of his face, eyes at the side of his head and deformed legs. And she decided then and there that she wasn't going to take me home. And she spent the next little while talking to anyone and everyone she could, her local priest, her local doctor, politicians, and other people for advice, and who she thought may help her not bring me home.
Right.
And a couple of weeks after that, she was sent home from hospital and said, you can take Robert as well, but she left me behind. And then she spent another few weeks after that thinking a bit more about what her reasons were, and she was kind of concerned that she had 4 other kids to look after, and she didn't know what impact bringing me home would have on them. And she decided that if she was going to worry so much about that, she ought to give them a bit of a say.
Right.
So she brought them up to hospital to have a look at me, and then a couple of days later, my mother and father sat my siblings down and they had a family meeting around the kitchen table where all important decisions are made.
That's right.
And my parents took a vote and asked my brothers and sisters one by one, do you think we should bring Robert home? And one by one, thankfully, they said yes.
Yeah. And your youngest sister, I love that part.
Yeah,
Right.
My youngest sister, Catherine, who was only 4 at the time, thinks the only reason she said yes was because everyone else said yes before her. So that's a big vote for peer pressure.
Peer pressure and sibling pressure.
Yes.
Very true. So I love that story. And I love you dedicated this book to your mom and your dad, which is so wonderful. But they were determined to have you have a normal Australian childhood. And so tell us a little bit
wrestling
about that.
crocodiles, chasing snakes.
Yeah.
No,
No, I know. But you grew up on Bayside in Brisbane.
Yep.
You know, you grew up, and they really were determined that you were going to have as normal a childhood as possible, even though you were in the hospital so
Yes.
much and those experiences. But what was it like for them to give you that experience, that normal childhood? Because I think, you know, the way you described, you were like any other boy in the way that you joked around, you loved to pull pranks on people, and I want to hear what your favorite prank was that you ever did. But, you know, just being a normal boy and hanging out with your siblings and stuff like that. So tell us how that normal childhood was.
I think, you know, that was probably one of the most important aspects of my life and shaping my character. I don't know how, and I think it was probably iterative and partly accidental, but my parents ended up having this really wonderful kind of matter-of-fact view of my disability and deformities. So it was just really simple, saying, well, you've got 2 artificial legs, and you've got a funny face, and here are some things that go along with that, and this is how it impacts on your life, but get on with the rest of it. And it was all actually about the tone and the way they kind of treated me, which acknowledged who I was and acknowledged that those things had, you know, a definite and sometimes big impact on my life, but that they didn't control all of my life.
Right,
and that was really important because it kind of shaped my thinking. It also shaped the thinking of my brothers and sisters, who kind of understood really quickly that you know, they didn't have to mollycoddle me and didn't have to take too much care of me beyond making sure I stayed alive. But but other than that, you know, I just had a whole good range of normal childhood experiences. We'd go to the beach for a holiday every year, and I'd go to the surface to swim with the other kids, get sunburnt, you know, all sorts of really small little things, but those small things kind of come together to make a normal childhood.
Right. And not setting you aside or apart.
Yeah.
But being a part of, right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. So your mom, and this is the thing you talk about a lot, is her honesty, but also your family's honesty and telling the truth and never hiding that from you, and her diary. And tell us a little bit about her diary, because I think that's just absolutely, and she would read to you from her diary.
She would.
Which is so incredible.
So one of the things one of the doctors, a psychologist, suggested to my mother really early on after I was born was that she should keep a diary of her feelings. And Mum took that to heart, and so she started writing in this lovely little blue journal which had this marbled cover, and writing down really honestly and frankly the facts of what happened, but also her feelings about it, and that was extraordinarily frank. And she kept that diary all the way up until I was about 12, until she filled it. Though, mind you, she'd take in the back, every now and then she'd take a phone message or write the lotto numbers down. And she could have done that and hidden it away and never shown it to anyone, but she didn't do that. It was on her bedside table, or it was on the couch next to her, or it was on the kitchen table, getting drops of butter on it. And it was really obvious, I think, to the whole family that it was just one of those objects of power that every household has, that isn't something that has power intrinsically, but just it's regarded as something really important. And so even before I could read it, I understood its importance. And because Mum had it around and it was a book and it had writing in it, I'd ask her to read from it. And she would. And I'd say, "Oh, Mum, can you read to me again from the book about when you didn't want to bring me home?" So she'd choose a random bit, maybe a bit about me playing up and getting into mischief, or whatever.
Sure, right.
But it was vitally important for me when I was writing the book, for a couple of reasons. One, my mum died almost 20 years ago, and we'd spent my 20s arguing over who should write a book, and I genuinely think she should have written a book, because they're different stories, and
Sure.
I think I can reflect a bit on some of the issues parents go through, but I think my mother would have done an entirely different and much better job of that. But this diary was important because it was obviously a good source of factual information, and I've got a little bit in the young readers edition and a bit in the adult book as well that are actually just quotes from when I was born that I pulled from Mum's diary. But probably more important than that, her frankness in the diary gave me permission to be really frank as well. And I was concerned about making sure I did justice to her in the pages of the book, and I hope I have. But that frankness in the diary was really, really important, because I don't know how comfortable I would have been speaking about her and her feelings that frankly if I didn't kind of have access to that.
Well, and the thing is, what you've written has such power because of that truth.
Absolutely.
And that's what you're showing kids.
Yeah.
And that's what your whole story of, your resilience, your courage and everything, and having a family that didn't treat you any different than anyone else, in the family, you were a family together. But I think a lot of what you went through, you had to mature faster in some ways, even though you were still a goofing kind of boy.
I don't know if I've matured yet.
Well, no, we never need to mature all the way. Life's no fun that way. But I think you did in a lot of ways, because I think you talk about other kids that you saw in the hospital.
Yes.
And you noticed, that everyone has their differences. And I think you saw things, and that insight you had, you obtained that at a much younger age, or even sometimes some people never obtain that insight. Do you feel that that's part of what, because that way, of course, yours wasn't a typical childhood, but what you saw really contributed to that.
Oh, absolutely. And I think there are probably a few really important aspects to that. There were those experiences, like spending so much time in hospital, but also between going up to hospital for doctor's appointments and doctor's visits and going to the place that made my prosthetics, probably from the time I was born and until probably the time I was 14 or 15, there would often be trips up to the hospital or my leg manufacturer 2 or 3 times a week, and we lived half an hour's drive away, and that meant a lot of conversations with adults, a lot of conversations with my mum or dad sitting in the car, half an hour up, half an hour back, which kind of, I think, shaped me in a lot of ways as well.
Right. And you had 24 operations by the time you were in 14.
Yep.
Or in 9th grade, probably.
Yes.
And you talk about yet you were given, your parents gave you a choice, which was an incredible thing to give you. But also,
an awful thing.
An awful
thing
to give you, but also to give this decision to a 14-year-old boy, because we know what 14-year-old boys are like.
Well, my view, and sorry to any 14-year-old boys watching, but my view is grade 9 boys are the worst form of humanity in existence, and that includes me, and especially me. But when I got to 14, doctors said to my parents they wanted to do another really big operation on my face. I think doctors are a bit like artists, and they want to keep tinkering, and they didn't think they'd finish the job on me, so they wanted to say, oh, let's do another operation. We'll make Robert look even better. And so they had a whole range of things they were going to do. And as you said, my parents then sat me down and said, well, Robert, it's your choice. I'm like, I've got no idea how to make this decision.
Yeah. But I guess your brother also said something really wonderful to you, too.
He did. We talked about what the operation was going to involve, and what the procedure was going to be, and all of those kinds of things. And essentially, the doctors were going to get rid of some of my scars, get rid of some of my bumps, fill in the dents at the side of my head where my eyes had been when I was born, and build me a new nose again. And because my eyes were still a little bit further apart than they should be, and building me a new nose would emphasize that, we're going to move my eyes about half an inch closer. And so we sat down and talked through all of this when I finally had to make the decision. And when we were talking through the risks, risk of infection, a risk that it could undo some good work the doctors had already done, and then a risk that a 1 in 4 risk that I might go blind because they were moving my eyes again. And my brother Michael had been pretty quiet for that whole discussion. Just piped up and said, "Well, what use is it looking pretty if he can't even see him? What use is it being pretty if he can't even see himself?" And it just kind of clicked for me then and there that, no, I'm done.
Yeah,
it's enough operations for me.
Yeah. And you know what? I watched your TEDx talk. It was fabulous.
Thank you.
Wow, so great. And I, talking about what's on the inside, and talking about there's different definitions for many different things, and beauty is one of those things.
Yep.
So tell us a little bit of that, because your message in that TED talk, everyone should watch it. It's really, really incredible. So tell us a little bit about that and your views on that, and also too. And this wasn't so much of the TED talk, but when you talk to kids, you were bullied a lot, not only by other kids, but also by adults in their horrible things they would say. But tell us a little about some of the stuff you put in your TED talk, which was so moving.
Yeah, thank you. Particularly when we talk to kids, I think too often we have this approach that we try to convince them that differences in appearance don't matter by pretending they don't exist. And they do exist, and kids might watch mum try on 3 dresses before, and do her hair before she goes out for the evening, and they might watch dad try on 4 ties and trim his beard within an inch of its life before he goes out to work. So kids constantly get told that everyone's beautiful. Now, personally, I don't believe that's true. I think aesthetically, I'm ugly, and I don't have a problem with that word because I think it's true. there's a whole range of definitions of beauty, and I think there's a whole a broad aesthetic range of beauty as well.
Right.
But what I try to tell kids is that it's actually okay if you feel that you look different. And the first hump we need to get over is pretending that kids don't look different from one another, because if we try to tell kids that they don't look different from one another, then it's impossible for them to engage with how they look, and it's impossible for them to own it.
Right, right.
So the discussion we should be having is like, okay, you know, yep, you've got one ear that's a bit higher than the other, or you know, that person has a scar because they were in a car crash, or you know, this person's in a wheelchair, or you know, this girl who's in grade 2 is already taller than all the boys.
Right.
It's like, don't worry, the boys will catch up at some stage. And I think that kind of honesty is really, really important, because kids get that and they see that and they're curious about that. And we can't get to the second step if we don't do that. And the second step is really simple, and it's saying, look, just because someone might be beautiful, it doesn't mean they're necessarily nice or smart or trustworthy or wonderful. And just because they're ugly, it doesn't necessarily mean they're untrustworthy or awful or mean.
Right.
And you know, it's not a hard conversation to have.
Right.
It's awfully hard to convince kids and adults. But the first place to start is by stopping pretending that differences in appearance don't exist.
Right. So how does your family feel about the book? Or books?
Well, look, my eldest brother, Michael, he didn't want me to write the adult book. And so he was 10 when I was born, essentially 10. He was 4 days off turning 10. And I think more than anyone else, he had, you know, a very good understanding of the impact a baby like me had on the fabric of the family. And I think he was worried about whether, you know, whether I would do a fair job representing mum and dad. And he said, I don't want you to write the book. And I said, well, I'm going to write the book. If you don't like it, write your own. Because I'm mean. But we didn't have a lot of arguments about it. But the rest of the family were tremendously supportive. My father was still alive when the adult edition came out in Australia, and it was only the second book he ever read. He'd read the newspaper cover to cover, but sat down and read my whole book, which was really, really lovely.
That's great. Fantastic conversation with Robert Hoge, Australian author, about his new book. It's called Ugly, his memoir. If you read Wonder, R.J. Palacio's book, this is the true story. Thanks for joining me on Authors Revealed.